friends, and welcome back to my channel, and welcome to the beginning of another episode of Tarot in Practice. In case you're new, in this series basically I pick a tarot deck that I own and I vlog my experience of working with it for 2 to 4 weeks. So basically I take you through the journey of me doing readings, doing exercises, journaling. I share my interpretations of the cards, my thoughts around the cards, and then at the end of the video I do a little bit of a wrap up, a bit of a review, and also decide if I want to keep the deck in my collection or not. So a little bit of background. Back in January last year, I bought the Children of Litha Tarot, but when it arrived, I just didn't feel ready. I wasn't ready to open it up. So it sat in the box on my shelf until just a month or so ago. When I opened it up, I was immediately taken by this artwork and by the choices that are made in the depictions of each card. I really enjoyed it. I sat down, I read the little white book, I went through each and every card. I really took my time, sort of just like introducing myself to this deck. And it's not exclusively an animal deck, but all of the minor arcana, sort of like 2 to 10, are animals. And if you know anything about me, you know that I'm not big on animal tarot decks. So this is a little out of my comfort zone, but just going through the little white book and looking through the imagery, these cards just sort of made sense to me, and I really liked the choices the artist made. So I was very excited about this deck, but there is a but. The cardstock on this edition that I have, which I think is called the Black Edition, is a very sticky, clumpy rose petal finish. Now I know that won't bother everybody, but for me, I find it very difficult to work with. You can riffle shuffle it, but in terms of overhand shuffling, the cards get clumped together and I just find it difficult to use. But then I found out the first edition, which is called the Gold Edition, I think, actually had matte cardstock. So I decided to put my feelers out and see if I could get myself a copy of that. And it was good old Tom Benjamin, whose channel I will leave a link to in the description box below, came through. He reached out and said that he had the Gold Edition and that if I paid for postage, he would be happy to gift the deck to me. Isn't that nice? So it has just arrived. I picked it up from the post office a couple of days ago and it's everything I hoped it would be. And I am here and ready and so keen to finally get to actually shuffling and working with this deck properly. Also, heads up, I will be giving away my Black Edition of the Children of Litha at the end of this video, so stay tuned. So all that's left to do is for me to start shuffling and start reading. So let's go. Hello and welcome back. Today I have decided that seeing as this is a brand new deck, I would love to do a deck interview spread. Quite a while ago I did do a whole video about the spread that I use for deck interview spread, so I will leave a link to that in the cards and the description box down below for you. I'm going to lay it out a little differently just so we can fit it in frame, but I'm going to be using the same spread. So I'm going to go ahead and shuffle, I'll lay all the cards out and then we can talk about the positions. Oh wow. The sun and the moon bookending this spread already. I'm so excited for this. Okay, so the first thing I noticed was absolutely the fact that this spread is bookended by the sun and the moon. I think that's incredible. I'm so excited to get into this already. And then the next thing I noticed was that out of the 7 cards, 4 of them are major arcana. There just seems to be an awful lot of like symmetry in this spread overall. So our first position is this one over here and we got the moon. This position is for what can the deck teach me? And we've got the moon, which is a beautiful depiction of the moon with this dragon and like these shadowy sort of, I don't know, sprite figures coming up from the water. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And for me, the moon is often just about the things that aren't obvious, the things that we don't always notice or aren't conscious. I think our senses are just so heightened at night. And I think that allows us to see and feel and notice beauty in ways that we don't normally. But it does also mean that our minds can run wild with possibilities that can tend to the more scary, nightmarish side of life. I think this deck is here to help me confront those shadows, the things that go bump in the night, the things that I maybe try to suppress or ignore, but my imagination can sort of blow out of proportion because I'm not bringing them to the light. Okay, and then our second position was this one here, and this is for the deck to tell me a little bit about itself. And for this, we've got the absolutely beautiful Death card. Such a striking card with so much detail. Like Death is some kind of puppeteer, definitely the master of its realm. And I feel like this connects beautifully to the moon too. I like the Death figure here. It has gills. Even like its fingers, so much of it looks very reptilian or like fish-like. and behind it there is water. We see like ripples around those flowers. It looks like a beast coming out of the water, which is sort of also what we see in the moon card. So I guess in terms of that connection, I'm wondering if this deck is telling me that not only is it going to help me sort of, see in the dark and confront those demons that are hiding in the shadows, but maybe like this deck is almost going to represent those demons, if that makes sense. Like speak for those demons so that I can interact with them through the deck. And when I say demons, I don't mean like literal devil entities. I'm talking more about, my psychology and my own shadows. And I think that this depiction of death is really stunning. Like, it doesn't look malicious or mean or anything, but there is still this power and this control in the death figure. So I think this deck is going to be a very strong force to work with. And then this card below is position number 3, and this is representing how the deck sees me. And for this position, we have drawn the Page of Wands, which is, again, another stunning card. This entire deck is just absolutely beautiful. The colours, the detail, the interplay of animal and human and environment, and just like how the elements come out so strongly in the art. I think it's beautiful. So the Page of Wands is how this deck sees me as a reader coming to it. And if we think about the pages, they are very much more the youthful energy in the court, the learners, the beginners, the seekers, as opposed to the adepts. And then for Wands, it's all about passion, energy, excitement, enthusiasm, and all of those things I identify with quite strongly. So I think the deck is certainly seeing me for who I am in a lot of ways. I think it's seeing me for the lightness, the enthusiasm, the excitement that I bring to the table, but that also I have an awful lot to learn. I do also think of all of the pages, there is like a willingness and like a braveness about the Page of Wands in particular, but there can also be like a brashness and an impulsivity. So all of those things I think can apply to me in equal measure too. Now for position 4 in the middle here, this is how can we best work together. And I drew the 9 of Cups for this one, which is this incredible image of the octopus holding these cups. It's really beautiful. Am I going to say that about every card? You bet. The 9 of Cups, I often think of things like emotional contentment or satisfaction. There's a sense of confidence and self-assuredness that comes with the 9 of Cups, I think. It's sort of like this awareness of your successes in life and having achieved what you wanted to and finding meaning in life, but not taking it all too seriously. And I think that's shown beautifully with the octopus in particular. It almost looks like it's holding these cups up in celebration. And I think this is a great card to come up in this position because I think especially with these first 2 cards with the deck describing itself and what it's here to teach me, they are both quite serious and intense cards, whereas I think that there's like a softness, a playfulness to this one here. And I think this deck is reminding me that it works well when I don't take myself too seriously, that this deck is not just here for like navel gazing shadow work. Instead, it's here to help me, celebrate myself and to find emotional fulfillment and satisfaction and to make meaningful connections in the world that matter to me. I'm sort of, also with this connection with the death card, I'm sort of getting like enjoying life, finding meaning and happiness and fulfillment in my life, like in that very simple way of like you've got one life to live. Let's figure out how you can live it well. Our next spread position, this one here, is number 5, and this is what the deck sees as its primary strengths. And we drew the 8 of Coins with this donkey or mule, I guess, sort of making its way up the hill. I love the flower crown around its head. Oh my God. This deck makes me emotional with how beautiful it is. And I think it's interesting, these 2 cards to me, like how the deck sees me and then its strengths as a deck. I feel like these 2 cards work really well together. Like I said, the deck sees me as someone who's a beginner, who has a lot to learn, but has a lot of enthusiasm. And I think the 8 of Pentacles is all about like hard work, applying yourself, taking each little step all the way up the mountain, no matter how hard it gets, and focusing on that destination. So primarily I'm getting the message that this is a hard-working deck that is willing to show up for me if I'm willing to show up for myself. And then our next card is the weaknesses that the deck sees itself as having. And we drew the Tower. How interesting. And what a striking tower it is. And when I very first drew this card out of the deck, I thought there was a few different ways we might go with the interpretation, but now that I've sort of worked through this all and it's coming together, I think this is very clearly that This deck is not a deck that I'm supposed to come to when I'm in crisis. I have other decks for that. I have other resources for that. This is a deck that wants to do the hard yards with me. And that's the sort of stuff that, yes, can be very challenging and confronting, just like the Moon and Death card, I think, are very intense cards, and they're sort of confirming and validating that. But there is a difference between these spaces and the Tower. This is an emergency situation, and I think in order to do this sort of work that the deck is proposing that we do together well, you have to be in an open and safe space. You can't be in a place of crisis. So ultimately, I'm getting a very clear message that this deck is here to do the hard work with me, the difficult work, the deep, complex, sort of like emotional, psychological, self-reflection and exploration. This is not here for those immediate, desperate moments. This is here for the bigger picture, my life journey, my life goals, for my development and growth as a person, and for my overall satisfaction and the meaning that I can derive from my life. And our final card here is our potential together, the relationship, sort of like the outcome of us working together, me and this deck. And we drew the incredible Sun card, and I'm still just in love with the fact that this spread is bookended by the Sun and the Moon. It's just so joyful and alive, and I love how like there's this playful element, but just beautiful. The Sun illuminates. That's, to me, the primary message of the Sun. Sometimes in the negative connotations, or if you read reversals, that can be like almost blinding or overwhelming or even burning. Whereas here, it's almost like we've got a character arc from the Moon, from the shadows into the light, with awareness, with joy, with celebration, with freedom, with self-expression. I've really enjoyed this. I have not done a deck interview spread in quite a while, and I wasn't really sure what to expect. It makes me so excited for the potential I have with this deck. And I think it has also given me some clarity on what to come to this deck for and how to work with it, and sort of maybe what I can focus on when I am asking it questions and when we're working together. Hello, today we are doing a 3-card spread. That is a little bit of a classic and one that I have used a lot, but I haven't done in a little while, and I don't think we've done it together in one of these tarot and practice videos yet. And given what we learned about the Children of Litha in the deck interview spread, I think Within It Without Advice is a perfect little reading to do with this deck. So I don't really remember the details, but I know that I originally heard of this spread via Kelly from The Truth and Story. And I think she did like a collaboration or something with Patrick a while ago. And this spread was a part of that. I don't remember much more. I think it was a challenge of some kind. I just remember really liking Within Without Advice, and I've kept using it ever since. Let's draw a card for Within. What's going on for me internally at the moment? And I've drawn the 2 of Swords. I know exactly what this is about. Now what's going on for me externally? Can I have a clear message, please? Oh, okay, a card just flew out. The Knight of Wands. It's quite a ferocious card. And then my advice. Oh, there we go. Ooh, King of Swords. Pretty card. So for Within, what's going on for me internally, I drew the 2 of Swords, which is such a beautiful card. We've got these 2 owls sort of like facing us as the viewer. And underneath them is this little mouse, this timid little mouse. So traditionally this card often represents like a choice that needs to be made, but that internal conflict that comes from like indecision or not being sure. And I think from that, things like procrastination or like a standstill or just like overwhelm with indecision can come along as well. I think even issues of like avoidance can come up in this card too. And for me, when I'm looking at this card, the first thing that I see are these owls and just like sort of how much of a strong presence they are in this card. It's almost overwhelming. They seem quite intimidating. And I think especially from this little mouse's perspective, I can only imagine that would be quite scary. So these owls that look so aware of their surroundings, and it's almost like they've spotted us out of the bushes or something. And the mouse is, I don't know, trying to navigate its way through the dangers and figuring out which way does it need to go. Whichever way this mouse turns, there's a good chance it's going to be spotted by one of these owls. So it's in quite a precarious position. Having said that though, staying where it is much more dangerous. Like it needs to make a decision. It needs to make one pretty quickly, but there's a lot of things to consider and that can be quite overwhelming. So I think this card is acknowledgement of the fact that I do have a choice to make, and I do feel quite stuck in this situation. I feel sort of unsure, almost like whichever option, you know, there's pros and cons to both. And it is hard to tell from my point of view, like which is the right option for me, you know, like there's a lot to consider. But for me, this card is always a good reminder that sometimes it's not so much about which choice you make, it's just about making the choice. Like I said, staying still for this mouse is almost more dangerous than any other option. Not saying that I'm in danger, but I think it is a bit of like a cautionary reminder that I have to take ownership of my decisions and I have to be decisive, you know, like it's not that one option is inherently better or one path is like the right path. I can get very caught up in that sort of thinking in my head. Instead, it's just about making that decision and committing to it and knowing that you did the best you could, you know? So I think this is very representative of my internal conflict and indecision and confusion and uncertainty that I've got going on at the moment. And for the without, the card that represents like my external influences, things that are happening around and outside of me that are impacting my internal experience at the moment, is represented by the Nine of Wands. And I do think it's funny that out of all of the cards, this is the one that like flew out of the deck. That is some very stereotypical Knight of Wands behavior, if you ask me. So all of the knights in this deck are quite aggressive. Like they're all sort of attacking or have already killed another animal. And I think that's symbolic of, you know, the hunt, the chase, the pursuit of something that the knights so often represent. The Knight of Wands in particular is such like a passionate, fiery, excitable, adventurous card, but I think it can also represent things like pride, brashness, and over-eagerness to like prove yourself, things like that. I think the knights, and in particular the Knight of Wands and the Knight of Swords to an extent too, I think they can often represent like this self-righteousness as well. And I know that I'm being a little bit vague, but this reading, I think, is definitely speaking to a particular situation in my life at the moment. And there are a lot of strong personalities. There's a lot of hot-headedness going around, a lot of very brash decisions. And I think a lot of people out to prove themselves or out to prove that they're right, whether that's actually the most useful or helpful thing in the situation. And although the court cards can be representative of like a person or a figure, to me, this is more representing the energy of like a collective in my life at the moment, like the energy of these people coming together. This is very like how it all feels at the moment. It's quite combative. It's quite fiery. It sort of feels like everyone's just butting heads. No one's really hearing each other. But everyone is out in pursuit of something, although it doesn't really feel like we're all heading towards the same goal. It's a little overwhelming. There's some strong egos and some strong prides and all of that sort of stuff. So I think this card does work quite well. This is very much how it feels being in amongst all of this at the moment. And then for my advice, we drew the King of Swords. Now, as I said, court cards can be representative of people. I think they can also be representative of traits that we need to embody. And as this is coming up in the advice card for me, that's sort of how I'm viewing this card, as some of these traits from the King of Swords that could be helpful for me at the moment. And for me, the King of Swords is such like a strong, fair-minded person, and I think especially with the Two of Swords as our internal card, I think of any card that can overcome that indecision and that uncertainty, it is absolutely the King of Swords. I think the King of Swords is such like a self-assured person. I think they know exactly what they want and what they need to do, and they're uncompromising in that sort of way. I think they're just very clear and direct, and I definitely need a little bit more of that energy in my life at the moment. I think there's someone that can speak up for themselves, to advocate for themselves and for others where needed, but they're also willing to draw clear lines in the sand and to be very clear about boundaries. And I think, you know, when they make a decision, they're not second guessing themselves. You know, they know that once the decision is made, they need to commit themselves to getting the best outcome for everybody involved. So I think I definitely have a lot to learn from the King of Swords, and I think those are some of the traits that I definitely need to be embodying and bringing in more into this situation that I'm in at the moment. That decisiveness, that clarity of communication, and I think being really super clear with boundaries. And I think this King is also reminding me that at the moment what is called for is less an emotional response and more a measured, reasoned one. The Kings are very much to me like masters of their domain, and I think the King of Swords in particular. The King of Swords is a very fair-minded person, I think, and I also think that, you know, when they're making decisions or when they're communicating, it's not from like it's not a super personal place that it's coming from. It's a very clear, logical one. As my dad would say, the King of Swords is someone who plays the ball, not the player. You know what I mean? They're focused on the issue, not so much the people involved. There's a level of detachment, but it's intentional. So those are some of the things that are coming up for me with this reading. I know I couldn't be super specific, but it's one of those things that involve a lot of different people in my life. But I've definitely got a lot to take away from the King of Swords in particular, and some of the traits that I need to be embodying in order to sort of navigate this sort of like hot situation a little better than I am at the moment. We are back at my table, and you all know that that means we are going to be doing a spread. And I wanted to do a spread from the guidebook. There's actually a few spreads. We get a few 3-card suggestions here, if you can see those. Kind of pretty standard ones. Then we get a 5-card spread referred to as the star or the cross. We get a lover's spread. We've also got a finance spread that looks really interesting. An anxious summer spread. And Litha's wheel, which is sort of like a wheel of the year, but with like the seasonal rather than the monthly that a lot of people do. But I think today I'd like us to try out the anxious summer spread together. So I'm going to shuffle and draw the cards, and then we can talk about the spread. Okay. So those are our 6 cards, but here the hidden influences has an asterisk, and that means that I'm supposed to select the card on the bottom of the deck for number 7. And so that is the 4 of Pentacles. So as with earlier, I've sort of laid it out this way and just turned up the cards upright so I could fit it better in the screen. But yeah, so if you're wondering, I've sort of twisted the spread over anti-clockwise. So the first position over here is the card that represents the root of my anxiety, and I've drawn the Ace of Wands. And I'll give you a bit of a close-up. It's such a beautiful card. I love the aces in this deck, how they feel like elemental beings. And the aces are, of course, number 1 in each suit. They're representative of the potential, of the seed, of the beginning. And the suit of wands, being the suit of fire, is all about passion, exertion into the world, ambition, motivation. And I don't really know how to say this without giving too much information away, but I'm in a situation where I do feel that some of the things that I value highly, I'm being asked to compromise. And in the past, I have done my best to push for these values to be respected and upheld, to advocate for myself and others. Conversations with people in power in my life who see the world very differently to how I see it. And I guess I have been thinking a lot more about how the relationships themselves that are bringing me stress. But I guess it's the Children of Litha telling me that it's my passion and just how much I care about these things that is causing so much anxiety. This isn't so much like the situation or the issue. This is literally the root of the anxiety, as the position suggests. So the second position is the current trigger. What is currently triggering the anxiety? So this is a little bit more about what's going on that's causing the anxiety. And we've got the 3 of Swords, which is such a visceral card in this deck. It's fairly traditional. We have 3 swords going through a heart, but it feels so much more intense because of this poor swan, and just like all this blood in the water, all of it is very intense to look at. And the 3 of Swords is usually a pretty intense card in any Rider-Waite-Smith based deck, because it's all about heartbreak, pain, loss, distress, struggle. And I have to admit that I did have a bit of a giggle, because I think the Children of Litha is poking a little bit of fun at me with this card. I think there's obviously several messages in here for me as well, but if we think literally about the imagery in both this card and in the Rider-Waite-Smith, what is it? It's a bleeding heart. And I don't know about elsewhere in the world, but certainly in Australia, people with a certain set of values and beliefs about what is good and right in the world are often described and labelled as bleeding hearts. Additionally, I think the swan is often associated with things like purity and innocence. And this rings home for me because I think I was somewhat naive in the situation that I'm in at the moment. I think I thought that what is happening is something that would not happen in the space that I'm in, if that makes sense. And so I think my frustration and my anxiety and my stress and my sadness is compounded by the fact that I sort of, in a way, I feel betrayed. I think in the same way this swan, this innocent, sweet swan, has been stabbed in the back. I feel like I've sort of seen an element to this organization and also to humanity that part of me wanted to believe didn't exist. So our next card is, card number 3, is the Queen of Cups, and this represents how I can cope. And isn't this, again, a beautiful card? I'm going to say it about nearly every card. I love how we've got the seal sort of like looking up to this queen. And in some ways she, I think, reflects the High Priestess, which I like. To me, the Queen of Cups is all about things like emotional stability, self-awareness, compassion, generosity. In DBT terms, I think the Queen of Cups has exceptional interpersonal effectiveness skills. And so I think this is a good reminder to not only be self-reflective and conscious of my own emotional state, but also bring a much greater level of compassion, I suppose, to the people that I'm interacting with. That even if I'm upset and I'm frustrated and I'm hurt by their actions, that I still need to find compassion for them in their situation as well. So let's move on to position number 4. And this represents what I am avoiding. And we've got the Hermit. I love this green. And I love how so many of the figures in this deck are sort of like humanoid with animal features. And I guess I'm going to be telling on myself a little bit in this, but that's just how the cookie crumbles, I guess, when you're doing tarot readings for yourself on the internet. While I have been very focused on making changes externally, trying to advocate for my position and why I think things should be different, and obviously that is causing me quite a lot of distress and upset and frustration and hurt. What I have been avoiding is perhaps some of that more personal reflection on my own contribution to this situation. I think the Hermit is all about taking time to ask ourselves the hard questions, to reflect on our own position, our own thoughts, our own feelings, our own journey. And also maybe I've been avoiding going my own way when I need to. Our 5th card is what I need to confront, and I've got the 3 of Pentacles, which has these beautiful, I think they're ox. They sort of look like they're pulling up a very heavy load together. I think what I need to confront is the fact that the people that I'm involved with in this situation have different goals from me. And that is why I think I'm struggling so much to feel like a valued contributing member. Additionally, and I don't know that I'd always think this when I see this card, but right now something struck me, and it's the idea that although there are these 2 ox in the card, I'm wondering who's holding the reins and how they are contributing to this. I think in a way it's sort of like it doesn't matter how hard these ox work. At the end of the day, whoever is leading them is responsible for the direction that they're heading in. So I think this card is asking me to consider the nature of collaboration and teamwork, and to reconsider or reevaluate my position in this team, in this group environment. Then we've got our outcome card, which is this one, and it's the 6 of Pentacles. So we've got quite a few pentacles in the second half of the reading. And this is interesting because this definitely has quite a different vibe to a lot of the rest of the reading to me. And while I often see this card perhaps slightly more skewed negative than a lot of people do, I actually really like this depiction of the 6 of Pentacles. And to me, this feels quite sweet and like a symbiotic relationship between the birds and the stag here. It's not so much about like charity or like a selfless giving. Instead, it's a relationship here that is beneficial for both parties. And I think in a relationship like this, there is a need for both generosity and for trust. It's sort of that cycle of giving and receiving, I think. So this gives me a little bit of hope, because to me, this does contrast quite strongly with the 3 of Pentacles. I think they have 2 very different energies. Especially in this spread here. And then finally, the 7th card is the hidden influences, and I drew the 4 of Pentacles. So as I said, a lot of Pentacles cards in this second half of this spread. And I do think that this card is quite clearly representing the attitude of a lot of the people that I'm sort of struggling with. The 4 of Pentacles I think of represents conservatism very well. Often that is like conservatism with money, but I think it can be a little bit more broad in that interpretation as well. Like, yes, there is a stability inherent in the 4 of Pentacles, but I think often the card represents when that sort of stability is in shadow to an extent, or it's at risk of becoming a shadow. And I think especially in this card with this animal here sort of laying down in the snow with the pentacles seems like a quick way to lose your herd and potentially even freeze. And that is very much representative of the energy I feel like I'm coming up against. It's a very stagnant one. It's a very stubborn one. It's a very old-fashioned one. It's a conservative one. So I've actually found this spread really helpful. I think the deck really got at the crux of some issues for me, but also brought up, I don't know, some different angles to this situation that has been ongoing that I haven't really looked at it in this way before. I also wasn't really sure that this was the thing that was going to come up. I wasn't really asking about anything in particular. I just thought I'd let, the deck decide what I was most anxious about at the moment. And it's given me a hell of a lot of food for thought. So our last few readings have been pretty intense. And so today I decided that I wanted to just do an exercise from the Tarot Activity book by Andy Matzner. I decided to go with the 3 gifts, which is on page 114. The objective for this exercise is to take stock of your life. The background to this exercise talks about Hindu philosophy and the 3 processes that are continually at work in the world, which are creation, preservation, and destruction. And for the process, it says separate out the major arcana from your deck and put the minors to the side. At random, pick a major arcana card. The card you have chosen has 3 gifts for you. And then we're given 3 journaling prompts to work through with the major arcana card that we've selected. And so the card that's popped out for me to offer me 3 gifts today is the Wheel of Fortune. And I know we haven't really spent much time with the little white book in this video, so I wanted to read to you the little poem or incantation that's included for each card. For each major arcana, they're quite long. For the minor arcana, they're a bit shorter. It may be spring one moment and winter the next. First you are happy, and then you are vexed. Fear not the wheel with its ups and its downs. It's on the same face, whether it smiles or frowns. Both the good and the bad are needed to be, so take one with the other, for that is the key. And the message reads, the Wheel of Fortune emphasizes how cycles of fortune wax and wane, but that we should not fear this change, for all things shall pass. The fox may be the cleverest of creatures, but even he cannot outsmart his fate. So now I'm going to journal about the different gifts that this card offers me. So the first journaling prompt is, the first gift will help you create something that will benefit your life. And so I wrote about how the wheel reminds me what is in my control and what is not. It releases me from the burden of knowing the future and knowing everything. It reminds me to go with the flow, to roll with the punches, to take opportunities when they arise, but to stop agonizing over the unknowable. It reminds me of the importance of acceptance, of willingness, and it releases me, liberates me, so that I can create a happier, more mindful, present moment. It reminds me that life is not chess and that I need to stop trying to figure out my next 3 moves and just be when and where I am. The second gift will assist you in protecting something of value in your life. And in response to this, I was thinking about how the present is all any of us ever have. And I don't want to look back on this time and regret that I wasn't involved and aware enough. And this actually made me think of a card from a deck that I recently got, which is the Secret Garden cards. It's this small rock pool mini deck. And on the card it says, use the hours, don't count them. I don't so much have a problem with wishing my life away, but I think I definitely do have a problem with thinking or worrying my life away. And this moment and this life is as valuable and as precious as it gets. I'm going through some pretty big life changes at the moment, and you don't get to experience these big life changes very many times, and I think it's important for me to try and enjoy it, or at the very least fully participate and appreciate the experience. Additionally, my mental health and well-being are hugely valuable and precious to me, and I think this approach and these gifts that I'm being offered will help me better manage my anxiety and maintain my wellness. The third gift will allow you to change something in your life that isn't currently serving your best interests. And I was thinking about my perspective and focusing on the bigger picture and how important it is for me to remember my place in an interconnected web of variables over which I have very little control, rather than indulging some illusion that I'm at the center of all of this and that I'm in complete control. This desperation to know, to predict, to control, to preempt is not serving me at all. And it's harmful to me personally, especially regarding my anxiety. And it also requires me to imagine myself as disconnected and isolated from the whole, from my communities, immediate and distant. I think this perspective shift to a larger awareness will allow me to enjoy the good times, ride the highs, but it also allows me not to take the bad times and the downs so personally, not to assume responsibility for the tides coming and going. And this made me think of another card that I actually pulled for myself just yesterday from the Forest Fae mini deck. And that card was the Gatekeeper, with the message to let go. All things are possible on the borderlands. So this was actually a really good reality check for me, I think. Because I'm someone with generalized anxiety, I think in order to manage those difficult emotions, sometimes I seek to control rather than just to accept. And this card and its gifts are definitely reminding me of just how futile that endeavor is. Life is full of cycles and changes. Some of them we can be very active participants in, and others just sort of happen to us. Either way, the important thing is to remain present. And I think the only way to do that is to bring in a level of acceptance and willingness to go with the flow. It's a great little exercise and a great way to spend time with a card from your deck and to think about what it offers you and the messages that it brings in a new way. So we have come to the end of this tarot in practice, and I have to say, this has taken me longer to film than any other tarot in practice video has. It took me well over a month to finish, and this video has actually been quite challenging for me to put together. And that is not because I have not enjoyed this deck. I think you can tell from the readings that I've done, they've been very helpful, very insightful. The issue is, this deck is a troll. I think you could tell with some of the readings that I was being quite vague, and so I've kept in the readings that I felt like I still offered enough insight and sort of exploration of the cards, but there were several other readings that I filmed, that I started editing, everything that just did not belong on the internet and had to be scrapped. I have been going through quite a big change in my life, and so I think it's natural for the issues and the anxieties and the concerns around that big change to pop up in my readings. But something about the Children of Litha just kept sort of like going really ham on those issues in a way that I just didn't always feel comfortable sharing. So even though this video has been a bit challenging to film, my experience of this deck has been really positive. I feel like it's willing to get into the nitty-gritty, and it's willing to tackle the subjects and the issues that I'm a bit, sensitive around. And for me, at least, this deck definitely felt like, I don't know, it was quite pointed. It had a bit of a sharp tongue, but it also had a bit of a sense of humor too. Obviously, you don't need me to tell you that the artwork in this deck is beautiful. I also really enjoy the little white book. I like those little mantras or poems or whatever they're called. I also like that the little white book does often reference, if briefly, the content of the image. For example, when we were looking at the Wheel of Fortune, the fox in that image was spoken about in the meaning. And so you get a bit of an explanation as to why the fox was chosen or what it represents. And I do like that. I like feeling like the little white book and the deck work together, but not only that, like both of them work together in a way that helps you better understand the other. You know what I mean? Like they come together to form a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts, as opposed to feeling like two distinct, somewhat disconnected tools. So overall, I really enjoyed my experience with this deck, and I'm so glad to have a copy of the gold edition. Thank you again, Tom Benjamin. I just think that the matte cardstock, at least for how I read and how I work with tarot, is so much more usable. You'll probably notice that I overhand shuffle a lot, and I also overhand shuffle until a card sticks out that to me is, supposed to be the card used for that position. I don't just, cut the cards and then draw from the top. So I shuffle a lot and I overhand shuffle an awful lot. And so I think that's the main reason why the rose petal finish in the black edition bothered me so much. Because in order to use the deck, I had to completely change the way that I use cards, the way that I draw cards for readings. And as much as I liked the deck, I don't know that I was really willing to do that. Like I have a good flow, I have a good setup, I have a good system with how I like to do readings, how I like to pull my cards. And that really works for me. So why would I want to change it, So I do think I'm a little bit more sensitive to the sticky rose petal issue than maybe most people are, but I'm so grateful and glad to have the matte edition because I really like it. And it means that I can just shuffle the cards how I always do, how I enjoy drawing cards, and I get to play with this deck, which is all I really wanted to do. So it might be pretty obvious by this point, but I will be keeping the Children of Litha, the gold edition. That does mean, however, that I have a second deck, the black edition, to give away to one of you. So if the rose petal cardstock thing doesn't bother you too much and you are keen on giving the Children of Litha a go, then here are the rules to enter the giveaway. Firstly, you have to be subscribed to this channel. Secondly, you need to like this video. And third, leave a comment below explicitly stating that you'd like to be entered for the giveaway and letting me know which of the spreads or exercises from this video you enjoyed most. So do those three things and I will enter you into the giveaway. Entries will be open for the next 7 days from when I post this video. And then not too long after that, I will upload a video or do a live stream announcing the winner. This giveaway will be open internationally. Anywhere that I can send the deck of cards, I am happy to send them. But that about wraps up the video. So before I go, of course, I have to say a big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon for all of their support, especially to my high tier patrons, Livia, Lynette Brown, Laurie, and Ian Yitzhak. My patrons support me monetarily so that I can continue making videos for free for all of you. So a big thank you to all of them. And if you like my content and you would like to support me, you can find a link to my Patreon in the description box below. Good luck to everybody entering the giveaway, and I will talk to you in the next video. So much love. Bye.